Thank you very much, Galoran, and thank you all for joining us today and spending your time to talk about CCS and all the work that we still have yet to do together as a CCS global community. I'll try my best to help frame the conversation. We just heard the run of show, and there's clearly plenty to talk about. And I'd like to just provide that global overview to really set the scene, and I'll do my best to shave a little bit of time off and get us back on schedule as well. So this is a great problem to have with the growing exponential interest and activity in CCS. It's just wonderful. And so, again, one of the things that the Institute does well and historically has done for many years is track the global progress. And as you can see, interest and activity in CCS has been growing exponentially. If you look over the last 5 or 6 years, it's about 35% annual growth on a global basis. We're adding several projects a week to the data set that we track, and we expect that trend to continue. Right? So as of last month, there's well over 500 facilities that we're now tracking in various stages of development. 43 facilities are operating on a global basis with a capture capacity right at 50 million ton per annum. And these numbers are incrementing up every day. Carl at the IENA were talking, it's just tough to keep that accurate data, and what the data you had last week, it's out of date the following week. This is a great problem for all of us to have, right? All of this growth has been driven by strong policy, and we've clearly seen an acceleration of supportive policy for all forms of climate change mitigation, including a healthy amount of supporting policy for CCS, really catalytic over the last just 2 years. Right? And so while all of this exponential growth and activity is exciting, and it's really, really good to see, many of you good colleagues, we've been at this for several decades, right? We're still woefully short of where we need to be if we look at the trajectory of what all the climate math says, that we need to drive through on the order of a gigaton of deployment by 2030, and we need to get to multiple gigatons of carbon management, both point source carbon capture and storage, and the carbon dioxide removal by 2050 to reach our net zero targets on a global basis. So lots of good progress to date. This is really exciting and important times for all of us to work together. Plenty of good work out in front of us to get on that trajectory and get concrete and steel in the ground projects up and operating. Right? And again, all of this is driven, especially in the near term, by concerted government policy, a clear role for governments. Industry is going to be the groups that build, own, and operate this kit at scale, right? Academics need to continue to advance the R&D and help us generate that next generation of practitioners across all the fields that are required to do any form of major project. We're all in this together, and again, this exponential trajectory is wonderful to see. Again, strong policy growth, and whether you look at the number of NDCs that explicitly include CCS, whether you look at the targets that a number of nationalities are putting forward publicly, whether you look at the creation of international ambition, and I think just to point at this last COP, there was the announcement of the Carbon Management Challenge. President Biden announced that at the Major Economies Forum earlier last year. Large initial convening at the COP, right? This was in parallel to large ambitions, tripling of renewables, doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvement between now and 2030, the Carbon Management Challenge, all of these things in line with Paris Target Accords, all being discussed, right? Consistent with the math. It's not an either or, it's a yes and. We need all of this to reach our climate ambitions and goals, right? And CCS has its role to play alongside all the other technologies. So again, just in numbers, and I don't need to belabor this point, right? We see this exponential curve, 43 facilities in operation. It's great to see 33 facilities now under construction, some of those getting larger and larger scale in various parts of the world, and a number of facilities in advanced development around many jurisdictions, all driven by growing strength of policy. If you look globally, this is not uniformly distributed, right? I think all of us in this room know catalytic policy, the Inflation Reduction Act, combined with other policies in the United States, all the movement and policies that many of you are working on here in Europe. But we also see tremendous projects going forward in the Middle East, project development in China, a wonderful beginning of an exponential growth rate in developing Southeast Asia, and so much activity in a number of regions. Yet there are some regions still that are blank on this map, and a good conversation for all of us to have is what can we do collectively as a global CCS community to help accelerate deployment. Again, all the carbon and climate math says we need to deploy this globally. There's plenty of good work in front of all of us. A couple of trends we see globally, again, just to set the stage. Historically, most of the progress in the projects to date have been driven by business cases based on enhanced recovery, primarily in North America. The data point, maybe you can't read it because of scale, 1972, 50 years worth of projects of taking CO2 and putting molecules in the subsurface. Historically, that was a relatively small amount of capture facilities, gas processing, some of the low-hanging fruit where you had an industrial necessity to begin with, and again, mostly in the North American context. What we've seen policy-driven for the sake of climate change mitigation is an expansion of that, and again, exponential growth over the last several years. So application to a variety of sectors, right? Not just natural gas processing and some that we've seen historically. The formation of CO2 transport and storage as its own business model for that part of the overall value chain, right? We see that being deployed and approached and supported in many regions of the world. And so, again, not a one-size-fits-all here, and it depends on everybody's circumstance, but an expansion of the application, a growth in the relative size of each project, and growth of a system approach, hubs and clusters and networks. We expect all of these trends to continue, again, just as a growth trend of a relatively young deployed technology, right? So when we look at this in terms of modes of transport, we also see that widening and shifting as well. Historically, this was mostly pipeline transport in the United States and in a few other regions of the world. We see shipping becoming of interest. Clearly around the North Sea, clearly driven by projects and the ships being built for the projects in Norway, for an example. Interest in shipping around Southeast Asia as well, because there are some countries that have plenty of point sources, but they don't have adequate geologic storage. And so this is a trend that we would expect to continue as well on a global basis. Historically, as we all know, many of these business cases were on enhanced recovery, but now the vast majority of the projects we're tracking in various forms of development are geologic storage for the sake of climate change mitigation. 78% of those hundreds of projects are that case, and globally, we expect that trend to continue as well, right? Consistent with the objective function and dealing with climate change mitigation at scale. So many of you in this room know these technology developments and policy developments in Europe far better than I do. We've got at the Institute colleagues that are based here in Europe that know this more in depth than I do. But our data set, we're tracking now over 150 projects and various forms of development in Europe, which is great. You can see here on the slide the variety of applications that we're seeing in terms of CCS capture. The Net Zero Industry Act, NZIA, right? A nice ambitious target of 50 million ton per annum of storage by 2030. And so from my side of the Atlantic, it was great to see this, and whatever the Institute can do to help support this ambitious goal is wonderful, and we can talk about that throughout the day. It was great to recently see the carbon management strategy for industrial application and the targets that the Commission came out with. Again, durable policy that can help support business conversations and business cases for deploying carbon management technologies and applications at scale. And so a number of advanced technologies going forward, good support for R&D to continue growing the technology through R&D as we learn by doing and advance the technology through large-scale operation and experience. It's great to see the number of bilateral agreements where CO2 is going to cross sovereign territories and borders. We had a conversation with a number of governments just yesterday here. And again, I think we can increment this up because there were several bilateral agreements that were signed earlier this week as well. So it's really nice to see this level of activity led by government policymakers in the European theater. And while storage here, most of us expect that to be in North Sea, it's also nice to see other onshore storage being contemplated, thought about, and advanced as well. Right? The color coding on this map, I believe green countries or the lighter code, these are countries that already have public-facing documents in terms of strategies for CCS storage. The ones in the darker color are ones where that is in development. And again, government role to lead solid, durable policy where then commercial investment decisions and conversations can be made and business cases can be discussed. And so in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the notes here in terms of nation by nation, but clearly tremendous amount of activity that we can talk about today and all collectively work together to achieve. In the United States, just for a quick overview, Tremendous activity in the United States, really catalyzed by the combination of the Inflation Reduction Act 2 years ago, the CHIPS and Science Act, and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provides over $12 billion US to my colleagues from the United States Department of Energy and others to support project development in the United States. About half of that, I believe, has already been put into motion, which is great. And again, we're seeing tremendous amount of activity in the United States at a project level, driven by this strong federal policy support. There's also state level or subnational policy support that can be stacked and additive on top of these federal policy tools. Right? We can talk about the tax credits and those as a mechanism, but again, great progress on my side of the Atlantic. In addition to that, there's some other developments at a federal policy level. The Department of Interior is developing regulations for offshore CO2 storage. There's work on pipeline safety from the Pipeline Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, updating their pipeline standards. There's been a number of wells that have been permitted. This is not being done just at the federal level. That's being distributed to state level as well in some cases, to expand the bandwidth, because permitting is an issue in terms of how quickly these projects can get permitted, the time value of money, and what that means for actual deployment of these projects going forward. Now that we're getting in the implementation phase, there's also issues that we're facing in terms of community support, community engagement, something that's near and dear to the current Biden administration, actively working to do social justice, environmental justice conversations with communities. And so there's a lot still to work on, but it's great to see this really catalytic approach and exponential growth of projects in North America. That was in the States. Also, Canada, my neighbors to the north, tremendous movement there as well. The province of Alberta is where a lot of this is centered. Again, lots of opportunities for system efficiency, hubs and clusters and networks. They've invested in a carbon trunk line, is supporting infrastructure, and again, tools at the national and subnational level in Canada as well. Brazil currently, and we've got several folks from Brazil here with us today. You know, Brazil has the largest operating capture project, over 10 million ton per annum, which is Petrobras's project, the Lula project. Wonderful membrane technology below the sea in the pre-salt formation. Brazil has high ambition. They're one of the co-leads for the Carbon Management Challenge. And again, nice to see activity in Brazil that many countries look up to in terms of leadership in this space. And so tremendous activity in the Americas. If I look very quickly in the Middle East and Africa, about 8% of global operating CCS projects are located there. For instance, the first capture on a steel facility, Al Rayada in the UAE. Ambitious targets, really a spotlight because the last COP was there, and Dr. Sultan Al Jaber really framed it holistically, the appropriate role of carbon management alongside everything else we need to do as humanity at scale to reach net zero. But a number of good projects that are progressing, a number of policies that are progressing. The Institute is supporting a lot of that in a number of those countries. We expect that exponential trend to continue as well. And just, you know, at scale, at the COP, 2 COPs ago, I was at dinner with the Saudi minister and the president of Aramco when they stood up and said, we're committed, we are going to stand up a large carbon cluster network, Al Jubail, right, multiple point sources, 9 million ton per annum of capture and storage operational by 2027, and full scale 44 million ton per annum, one network and hub operational by 2035, just to give you an order of magnitude of scale, the rate of progress in the Middle East. In Asia Pacific, again, many good data points reaching that scale. In China alone, it's been really nice to see over the last several years the growth of projects and the growth of scale of projects in China. They started up their first megaton per annum project about a year and a half ago in August. That is a Sinopex project, over 1 million ton per annum. They got the project up and running and operating before they could build the pipeline. So last summer, they started up their first dense phase pipeline in terms of building infrastructure, 109 kilometers pipeline in China, sorry. And so again, just really, really nice growth. They've got capture on glass manufacturing. They're under construction now. Capture fully integrated from a greenfield new coal-fired facility in the power generation sector, 1.5 million ton per annum. So again, million ton, multi-million ton scale projects under construction now in a variety of applications in China. In Japan, tremendous leadership in the region broadly, right? They had a roadmap that was finalized last year. 240 million ton per annum target by 2050. Japan is supporting the development of 7 projects, cumulative capacity of 13 million ton per annum. That will be storage in Japan and offshore elsewhere, not in Japan. And again, really showing leadership in the region of how all of these countries are going to work together for a system of carbon management across many countries. Shipping clearly will be part of that, but again, a lot of good activity. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go country by country by country here, but suffice it to say, and again, because the Institute is headquartered in Australia, we've been doing our homework, really working with good colleagues across all of these developing Southeast Asian nations. Tremendous progress in a short amount of time in that region of the world. And so, in summary, this is great, right? I mean, if you look at the size of folks in this room versus last year, if you hear the volume of conversation, tremendous activity. We're at this pivotal moment as a global CCS community, but there's still a tremendous amount of work for us to do. How do we get from the 50 million ton per annum that's operating today to that gigaton scale, right? Close to 2030, which is consistent with what all the climate math says we need to be on a path to multiple gigaton scale mid-century. Right? And so that's the conversation that we're here to have collectively. I think that's the challenge that's out in front of all of us as a community. If there's anything that the Institute can do to help you advance toward that end, please let us know. That is our job, to be helpful, to have these conversations and convenings like this, to provide that global perspective. If that's helpful to any of you in the room, that's a conversation that we want to have any day of the week. So please lean into this conversation today. I hope that you all contribute to and receive much, much good information today. And thank you, and I'll hand it back to Glorin for our first panel.